Hey, yo, everyone, gather around. It's story time. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and A Conscious Party Productions. You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast.
A conscious party.
Revolutionizing our minds.
Elevating our consciousness.
Changing our worlds.
Your story.
My story.
Our story.
All right. Well, welcome to another episode of The Critical Social Worker. I had to look at my phone because I forgot what episode number it is. We're on number 46. So moving right along, almost to episode 50. And I'm happy to be here, joined by Josie Heyano. How are you this morning, Josie?
I am doing good.
Good. What's up, David? Yep, episode number 46. Yeah, well, Josie's joining us here from Anchorage. I was just looking at the weather in Anchorage right now, and you're a little warmer, but we actually warm up and pass you up next week. I think we get in the 40s.
Yeah. No, I'm excited for the warmer weather, but I will say around like May or June, I tend to migrate back up to Fairbanks. Most of my family is up there, and the summers are just so much better. And I love being able to just spend a few weeks like sitting on the back porch, 90-degree weather. Just, you don't get that in Anchorage. So yeah, warmer right now, but it won't be the place to be in a couple months.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a question for you then. So, because this is my first, I've spent a lot of time in Fairbanks, but I've never spent a summer here. I've been here a couple times for a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you do about the mosquitoes?
I feel like there tends to not, like, I think Anchorage is actually worse sometimes. If we get like a really hot summer in Fairbanks, there's not really mosquitoes. Sometimes in the evening, like when it cools down a little bit, the mosquitoes will come out. But last summer, my aunt got one of those things from Costco that's like I don't know the science. It's like a thing and you put it outside. I think there's like butane in it. I don't know the science, but we didn't have any mosquitoes in the evening and it was great. And it's only like I think it was like a 50-foot parameter. So if you stepped outside of that space, you could definitely like get chewed up. But like sitting outside on the back porch, we just turned that thing on and we were good to go.
Yeah, we're renting a place, and it's kind of like we moved in and somebody just left everything as it was without really.
Yeah.
And so there's all sorts of mosquito things up in the forest by our house.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure. I got to figure it out.
Yeah.
'Cause I don't know that I've ever been here when the mosquitoes. I think like I was here last year and the year before, just after they had went away, in August.
Yeah.
And so we'll see. But I hear everyone remarking that they're the Alaska state bird. And I spent a couple years living up in Barrow, and there's lots of mosquitoes there, and they're really big as well. But the wind's always blowing, right? So they don't bother you so much. But one day I came home from lunch, and I was left my truck. I think I left it running, and I left the window down, and I went inside and came back out, and I was late coming back, so I just jumped in the truck. But all the mosquitoes had took refuge in my truck from the wind, and like it was terrible. I had to speed up and roll the windows down and drive as fast as I could so they would get out. But it's no joke. The mosquitoes, if you've never been to Alaska, the mosquitoes are like
they're massive. Yeah. I feel like it's a funny thing in Fairbanks too, because I feel like it's at least in my family, like you almost don't want to say like bad things about the mosquitoes, because I feel like I can hear my aunt in the back of my head in the summer being like, well, at least if there's mosquitoes, that means there's no fires. Like it's not smoky. So I'm like, I don't want to like brag about there being, no mosquitoes or mosquitoes because fire season. Like there's always this like weird, like what to say and what not to say because you might jinx it.
Yeah, I understand.
Even like the hot weather, it's like, oh yeah, 90 degrees, this feels good. And then someone will be like, yeah, that's bad for fires though. I'm like, sorry I said that. Yep, you're right.
We have a comment in the chat from Jazz, but I'm not going to talk about it because I don't want to give any bad vibes to the mosquitoes or anything. It reminds me of when we lived in Hawaii. We had lizards all over in our house, and my wife was like, "They're because they poop on the wall and stuff." And she's like, "I wish they would go away." And I was like, "Well, why do you think we don't have why do you think roaches don't come in here? Yeah, they don't last very long because of the lizards." So
it's a balance, I guess.
All right. Well.
Yeah.
We were just talking about, I had a little bit of a rough morning. Not rough, I wouldn't say, but I was just running behind, and I tried to auto start my truck, and it said, "Oh, it can't start because I forgot to fill up the gas, so it wouldn't start." And then I was driving behind somebody really slow on the way here, and I was just reflecting also that daylight savings all week long. It's kind of like I'm staying up
Hmm.
later. Me and my kids are. I mean, they're really not. They're staying up to the same length
Hmm.
they were last week. It's just a different time on the clock,
Yeah.
and we got to get going earlier. And so I think it's just thrown me off all week long. And it just makes me think, some places it makes kind of sense, I guess. I grew up in Utah, and it does, lengthen the day kind of at that point in time. But Alaska, Hawaii's smart. Hawaii just opts out. Hawaii and Arizona, I think. But
Yeah.
Alaska, I don't know if they do it just so they don't have to, so they can stay in sync with, so we can stay in sync with the rest of the continental United States. But in Alaska, the daylight is constantly changing one way or the other, so it really makes zero sense because it's just going to
Zero
overtake it
sense.
anyways.
Yeah. And it's almost like for me, I'm starting to get that like more energy, the increase of spring, the daylight, and then we hit that daylight savings week, and I'm just like, I just plummet. It just completely takes away that like pep in my step every year. And it lasts too long. Like I always think a couple days I'll be back in a rhythm. And like you said, I've been up till like 11 o'clock every night, which for me at my age feels like the
Mm,
middle of the night and I'm going to be a mess. And then, yeah, just feeling kind of frumpy all week because of it.
yeah. Well, I mean, we'll talk more about it later, but it's kind of like decolonizing our own worlds as well, right? Stuff that doesn't make sense, that hinders us and burdens us, that just doesn't make sense. And,
Yeah.
if we
Yeah.
could figure out a way to move forward into things that are more logical.
I was
Um,
thinking about that this morning just as like, well, when you brought up daylight savings, it's like I feel like that's that social worker thing in my brain that goes like, if we just got people together and we like started a movement and like, we're all on the same page, what we need to do is organize. What we and my social work thing in the back of my brain is like, Josie, you don't have the capacity for that. This is not the time in your life to start a movement around daylight savings time. But I get so frustrated about it that my instinctual reaction is, no, I'm going to organize some people and we're going to get this changed because it's messing up my life.
Obviously, going even deeper because that may be, the system works us so hard in some ways and keeps us so busy that we don't have time to worry about things that we would change if we could.
Right?
Sometimes,
Yeah.
you know.
No, I agree.
In the big scheme of things, daylight saving seems really inconsequential,
Yeah.
but it is something that seems like it could be changed simply, and then we wouldn't have to
Yeah.
deal with it anymore.
But like you
Uh,
said, right? Who has time?
yep, yep. Well, Josie, tell us about yourself. You said, did you grow up in Fairbanks?
I did not actually. So I have to say first, because I've been working on this and practicing, and I don't know if Laverne's listening, but I want to start by saying Adat Yahut, Josie Heyano, Set Ejret, Degatan Eklan. So that's me saying hello, everyone. My name is Josie Heyano, and I am Degatan Athabascan. So shout out to Laverne Dementive, who is my auntie cousin. I just kind of think of her as auntie. If I remember right, my great grandma is her mom's sister. But I reached out to her recently, asking for some help, being able to introduce myself in Degaton. So I've been working on making sure I do that in the spaces that I talk in. But I grew up down here in Anchorage in the winter. And then I spent my summers on the Yukon River with my mom's family, about 20 miles upriver from Tanana. We had a fish camp. Well, we still do. And then half the time in Tanana and half the time in Bristol Bay with my dad's family, where we fish off of Ecock Beach. So I actually wasn't until I got way older that I ever spent any of my summertime in the Anchorage area.
Yeah, right on. Well, you hear oftentimes about fish camp in Alaska. Do you mind talking about it at all?
No, I would love to talk about it. Yeah, growing up, um, and this is an issue that's really relevant right now, and I know that there's a lot of my family and friends, especially in interior Alaska, that are feeling this. But I grew up going to fish camp on the Yukon, so my mom's family is from Tanana, and we would go upriver about 20 miles to our camp and spend about a month up there. Just at one point we had this giant tent from Costco where like our entire family slept in it. It was like this 2-room tent on a platform. My mom has since built like a little cabin up there, but we had our outhouse. We had a big double-decker smokehouse, and then we'd put our net in at the eddy up the river from our camp, and we would just spend all summer checking the net, putting up fish. It was a big family operation. All my aunties would come, all my little cousins. So we'd have all ages playing on the bank and swimming in the river and playing in the mud. And we would just kind of live our days by putting up fish. So it was a constant rotation and rhythm of, hanging strips out to dry, hanging them in the smokehouse, get the pressure cookers fired up and start canning and jarring jarring mostly. So yeah, a lot of summers is just processing our fish, which what came with that is I grew up on Yukon Kings my entire life. So to me, that was just this like resource that would always be. We always had strips in our freezer. We always had jarred fish. We always had these big, giant king fillets. Growing up, it was almost, I remember like my junior high school years, like, we're eating fish again. We're always eating fish. And at the time, that was Yukon King salmon, which is like unheard of now, right? Like you just never think that that's not going to be a thing. But I mean, probably my happiest memory is being at camp, and the proudest too, right? Like I learned how to drive the boat, learned how to pull the net up, to pick the kings out, to fillet, to cut strips with my mom. I got in trouble. I got to scrub the poles, which was the worst chore at camp. And then unfortunately, one of my big chores was to climb up the ladder in the smokehouse and inspect the strips in the half dry for maggot eggs. I'd have a little knife and I'd have to scrape the maggot eggs off of that, which that still haunts me to this day. But yeah, it was the greatest memory is my mom still goes, but they haven't fished there in years now. So she kind of just goes to be on the river and be at camp. But hopefully there'll be a time where we can fish for kings again.
Yeah. So are there none coming up the river, or have they placed limitations?
Yeah, there's been limitations. We haven't been able to fish the river for kings in I don't even know how many years now. I know there's actually some amazing students and researchers from UAF who are doing a lot of advocacy work in interior Alaska who know far more about it than I do. But it's a big issue along the Yukon River and our village communities who have, sustained and lived off of that resource since forever. And so actually the last couple of years, our tribe has actually gotten fish from Bristol Bay sent into the village and distributed to communities. So it really never would have imagined that happening growing up. You just think this is life. These kings are a part of what we do and our food source, and they'll always be. And that's just not the case anymore.
Yeah. It's kind of a somber tone, but if you just think about the magnitude to say that Alaska Native folks in Alaska aren't able to fish for king salmon.
Yeah.
I think that I don't even, I think that if you even said this to people in the continental United States, that they might care. And it's really odd that it's not a bigger issue. You know what I mean? Even me growing up, Alaska was this place that the salmon period were plentiful. And, that's where I knew all sorts of people that came up here to fish. And so.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I kind of walk in both worlds where I also fish with my dad's family in Bristol Bay and we commercial fish for reds. And we subsist at the same time. And, we've had record years the last 4 years in a row, like so much that the price of fish has plummeted because there's so much on shelves and in freezers still. So we've just had this giant surge of fishing commercially within Bristol Bay, some of the biggest runs that the industry has ever seen, which says a lot because the Bristol Bay run. Sockeye run is the largest in the world. Um, so we have this imbalance where, you know, now I'm fishing in my dad's community, and we're actually sending fish to my mom's community to be able to help support. Um, yeah, it's amazing to me that it feels like these types of changes would have taken longer, but really in a very short amount of time, we just saw a drastic reduction in fish in the river and our ability to fish, and just a way of life changing really quickly.
Yeah, well, like Jazz said in the chat, you know, it's our culture in these ways to consume and not think past it, or to make money and not think anywhere past that.
Yeah,
You know, and I just think it's a tragedy. I think it's part of globalism as well, right?
yeah,
You know, everybody wants to have the Bristol Bay king salmon or the king salmon, and you
yeah,
know, in all corners, not just the United States but the world. You know, and stuff gets shipped out everywhere, and so the end game of that, I guess, is that the people that originally used it to subsist on, it's not there for them, but people are
mm-hmm,
still receiving it, like you said, via commercial fisheries
mm-hmm.
and things like that. So it seems like things are equilibrium. They're out of balance. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think you definitely see that with the you know, the bycatch for you know, trawlers, and then the sports fishing industry hasn't changed much. I mean, people are still able to come here and sport fish kings, and it definitely speaks to our culture and what we've prioritized.
Yeah, they got, I think, a way forward. You know, we'd have to when I mean say we, like as a state, the state of Alaska would have to look
Hmm.
at fish, for example, and the resources differently than something like as a commodity that can make money. As only that, I mean, or as maybe like as primarily that, as you know, the top priority. And Alaska's kind of like that, just like Hawaii. You know, it you know, when it comes down to it, it's the money for via tourism and everything else seems to supersede everything. And at first, you know, those things would have said, well, it helps the economy and it helps boost things, but then it just kind of becomes a cycle of itself, right? You can't get rid of it because you need it, and it pays for this, this, and this. But it's
Yeah,
also taking everything out of equilibrium. You know, there's no king salmon here. The coral reefs are dead in Hawaii. That's probably time to start thinking a little bit differently. You know what I mean?
yeah, absolutely. And I will say, you know, I think it's a unique thing about like Alaska and our fisheries is, I think, embedded in our fisheries programs and even at UAF's biology, wildlife biology department and fisheries department are these incredible social workers who do not have degrees in social work but are doing the work. It's like shout out to like Michelle Quillen. She's a UAF biology graduate who does incredible advocacy work across the state of Alaska. She's at every fish board meeting. She is advocating for the rights of Indigenous people along the river systems to be able to fish those lands. She's advocating for you know, the policies and protections from a really scientific lens to be able to create sustainability. Brooke Woods is another amazing UAF student or graduate now, maybe, who has just really committed her life to this issue and her work. And both of those women, Indigenous women, do this through a lens of fisheries and biology, but it's social work. I mean, they are advocating like crazy. They are doing the research. They are having the conversations over and over and over again until that message gets heard. So super proud of those women. There's a lot more like them in Alaska who are not just doing the science and the research work to do the advocacy, but doing the community organizing too. I mean, I know Indigenous women in Bristol Bay who have organized, you know, their own, I can't remember Denali's last name, but she fishes down in Bristol Bay, and she owns, you know, she has her own fishing crew, and they spend a part of their summer sending fish up to interior Alaska to make sure the villages and communities have access to that. So I also think that really speaks to our culture and that community care piece, right? That like we might have fish in Bristol Bay, but like how do we get that to our relatives in interior? How do we make sure resources are shared? But I'm always really, you know, follow a lot of these women on Instagram and their socials and see the work they're doing, just powerhouses. And yeah, I think change will come because there's some incredibly powerful women, especially Indigenous women, who are making this their fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And the tide does seem to be changing. It's kind of hard to
Yeah,
monitor, but it is changing somewhat, at least from my perspective, and the consciousness of the people everywhere. But in Alaska,
yeah,
more Indigenous representation being taken more
yeah,
seriously, more involvement in the powers that be, and so
yeah,
if things keep swinging that way, there's a chance
yeah,
to turn things around. If anywhere it could happen, it could be Alaska
yeah,
for sure. Well, I just wanted to remark that I liked how you said that they were social workers, despite not being directly or explicitly, and that's been a
yeah,
big theme of this show. I think one of my problems with social work as a field is that it's narrowed it down to like either you get this degree or this degree and you get licensed, and that's the only thing that social work is. But there's
yeah.
been lots of social work
Some.
going on before that even existed. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm honest about myself, I was probably doing some of my very best social work before I ever even knew what it meant, and
Yeah,
which led me into the field. But I was
yeah,
doing good social work at that time.
yeah.
So, well,
Oh,
tell
I
us about your.
completely. I was
T-
going to say, I completely agree with you. I think that I use the word social work as much as possible in different spaces and acknowledge other people's work as social work. Because I think you're right. Like, we narrowed it into this lane that, and I even remember being in school and people were like, you can't say you do social work unless you have this license. Like, that is a protected title. But I look at like people in my community who never got a college education, and that hasn't
Mhm.
changed the way that they've led communities, that they've organized, that they have healed within their communities. And that's the spirit of social work to me. Like, I try to use that as much as I can and let people know, like, that is the work. That is, I mean, before we placed licenses and titles on things, that was the work. And that's actually something in our communities we've been doing since the beginning of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think of like, it just comes into my mind like what you would say an auntie or somebody that works like in an orphanage or was working with children and whatever, even if it's not even in a professional
Mm-hmm.
organizational capacity or something like that. How could you say that that person's not a social worker and then you could attribute somebody who, just immediately turns an adult and runs through school and gets a degree? And I'm not saying that person can't be a good social worker, isn't.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's kind of another
Yeah.
unbalanced perspective. Um,
Well, and you actually bring up a really good point that has been on my mind a lot lately. And I've had some conversations with some friends that are social workers, have been in the field a long time. But the further I get into my professional social work space, and trying to understand what my identity is as a social worker, as a licensed social worker, the more I feel like there are times when it conflicts with my other identity, which is as a matriarchal woman within my family, with that is somebody who um, grew up around other women who just cared for people, without expectation, without reward. Just that was the nature of who we are and what we do. Like, I think about my grandma Mary, who raised her kids in Tanana, and it's really profound to me when she passed away not very long ago. Um, she had four biological daughters. And when she passed away, I was really hit with the profoundness of how many people she actually raised, because it was so many. I mean, outside of her biological family unit, there were so many people who called her mom, so many people who called her auntie and grandma. And I look at all the women in my family, and very similar. Like, there are all of these people who have come into our lives, and people in need, people who need support, connection. And we don't really question that, right? We just take care of people. And I've found that as a woman working in the social work field, especially working with like younger people, um, I come across situations where I might be supposed to be providing clinical social work services to a young woman from Bethel who, maybe grew up in the foster care system, doesn't have connections to home, culture, any of those things, and who sees me um, as a woman who does have some of those connections to culture and family. And so I get torn between this identity of, my clinical social work lens, which is heavy on boundaries, right? Like what I share, what I don't share, my disclosure, how I communicate with you. And then my other identity, which is this matriarchal woman that my job is to care and to care for you. And especially when I see, this comes up a lot for me, especially with like Indigenous youth, that like, there's a part of me where I'm trying to be a clinical social worker, but I want to be anti. And that's tough. And that, I've tried to find ways to balance that in this work, and tried to find agencies and places I can work at where maybe there is a little bit more of that balance. But I'm still trying to figure it out. This isn't a well-rounded thought, because this is just something I'm starting to explore more and notice more, is that, yeah, that anti-identity, that part of me that is just how I was raised, how I learned to be, which I think led me to social work as a field, sometimes clashes with what is seen as like the ethical boundaries of social work or the role that social workers play. So I'm always trying to figure out how I fit into all of that.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm really glad that you shared that, and I had several thoughts. And one is just, when you talk about like saying, I can't remember the name of the person that you mentioned, but when you mention like somebody that's looking after lots of children, or that's a resource for children, right? Depending on who they could have good parents, bad parents, absent parents,
Yeah.
mixed parents, but it gives them a resource to go to. But the way we are in capitalism and in social work right now is it kind of narrows that down. So again, we talk about time, and even like it becomes a financial thing, is that
Yeah.
everybody's so individualistic. And so you're just supposed to be responsible for your own kids. You got to go to work, so you got to find
Yeah.
daycare that's been approved, and then they'll pay for it, and maybe the government helps out. But
Yeah.
it's taken so far away from what you're talking about, which is like, which I say is like a real, what a real community is supposed to be about, where
Yeah.
the children, again, regardless of who their parents are, they have resources within their own community. They don't need to go
Yeah.
to a professional social worker because the social worker lives down the street and they go over there every
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then when you are also talking about this, these like ethical dilemmas, basically, kind of,
Yeah.
when caught between two worlds, it reminds me of, I was talking earlier about how I was doing social work before I got a degree. Well, I worked at and eventually supervised a juvenile treatment facility. And so there were lots of things that I saw there, like I saw sexual things between kids, from kids and staff members, all sort like violent stuff, all sorts of things, deviant things. And so when I came to Alaska, I was like on this thing like boundaries, like I was,
Boundaries. Yeah.
totally. But I had moved to Barrow, now known as obviously as Utqiagvik, and you can't really have those boundaries because you're going to see folks at the store. You're going to have
Yeah.
dual relationships everywhere. It is just
Yeah.
not going to work out. And I'm not even from there, right? So imagine if you had grown up in the
Yeah.
community. How
Yeah.
could you become a social worker and not have dual relationships?
Yeah.
But then it also makes me think what you're saying about, so, I've been in social work education for like forever now, it seems like. And,
Yeah.
you'd think I'd have all these profound things that I'd learned. And I have. But one thing that I think that I've learned is that many people need like one of two things that they've been lacking: somebody to listen to them, but and also like a hug or a proverb, something along those lines. But you're
Yeah.
not really in many contexts of social work, you wouldn't be allowed, or it would be frowned upon, or at least highly scrutinized, to give someone a hug. But damn, that's all that I'm not all, but that's what somebody primarily needs sometimes.
Yeah.
And so, and I also get the need for boundaries because I've seen negative
Right.
things happen in where there's been power and
Yeah.
and whatnot. But I think that we're lost if, as a social worker, you can't give someone a hug that needs a hug on
Yeah.
both sides of it. You know what I mean? And so I
Yeah.
totally empathize with that dilemma that you're talking about.
Yeah. And I think, like, especially starting off fresh in the field, like, I loved my social work education at UAF. But my teachers were incredible, and they did, talk to us a lot about like there will be some dual relationships and ethical dilemmas, and you will have to kind of discover who you are in this space. And I went into it like well, the best thing I can do is be the absolute safest possible, which means I'm going to be like, you've never seen someone with boundaries as good. Like, I'm going to be so much boundaries that people are going to be intimidated by how much boundaries I have. And that worked for me for a little bit. Um, and I remember people would remark and say like, oh, Josie, like, she's got that firm like line about boundaries. And I was very like, don't hug me, don't touch me. Um, and I got about a year into that. And I recognized two things. One is that, exactly like you said, there were times where I instinctively knew that what was needed in that moment was physical touch and reassurance of some kind. Whether that was a hand on the shoulder, whether that was, a lean in and a hug, a side hug, something. That was what I instinctively knew was needed. And the second thing was, I started to recognize I needed that too sometimes. That when I looked at somebody who I felt needed a human connection other than just words, and I denied that, a part of myself didn't feel good with that either. And felt like my boundaries were really kind of holding me back from being authentic in the spaces I was in, and showing my care in a more human way. And like you said, there's a time and a place and appropriateness, right? Like, I doesn't mean I go around hugging everyone that's my client right now. Um, but the biggest thing that shifted to me is when, I'm working, because I've worked with teens and youth for a long time now. And when someone sees me and they haven't seen me in a while and they reach up to hug, like my old belief would have been, oh, nope, boundaries. But God, that shuts down such a big wall right there. And I don't do that anymore. And I'll share too that there was a dramatic shift for me when I remember being deep into my like, I don't hug, don't touch me. I will give you all of the compassion and humanity in the world except for an embrace. And I was working with a young woman at Covenant House. Been working with her for a couple of years and spent a lot of time with her. And I hadn't seen her in a while. And she came in the front doors and my face lit up. I was excited to see her. She got excited and she just ran and jumped into my arms. And I remember like this moment of like instinctively just wanting to hug her back so tight. And I did. And I remember the back of my mind thinking, well, you're hugging her in front of people. Like, this looks like a boundary thing, But I just hugged the hell out of her. And it felt good. It felt appropriate. And it felt like it was something that we both kind of needed in that moment. And she ended up just a couple weeks later passing away. And I have never regretted that hug. And it sticks out very profoundly to me as a moment that I recognize that in order for me to do this work well, which is going to involve loving people because that's just the work, I have to be able to connect in the way that feels best in that moment. I have to be able to show that type of physical connection. And part of that goes back to our earlier conversation that for this young woman, like, the relationship we had was that she would come to my office and drink tea and do craft work with me. And yeah, I was a clinician, but I was also just someone that she came and spent time with and told stories and listened to me and got advice. And my role felt like auntie. And it often does. And so in that moment, when someone's running up to you, reaching for a hug, like, I have to decide, am I auntie or am I, Josie Heyano, licensed social worker, and the auntie role is what I feel the most authentic in. So I think I learned a pretty valuable lesson there. So I take the hugs when I get them and I lean into them and allow myself to feel that connection too.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing about that. Again, it makes me think of several things, but let's turn to the dark side for just a minute. Well, it's kind of a positive and dark side. So I'm imagining myself as a kid, and I was troubled and I didn't receive affection at home, so I was desiring it, or maybe not desiring it, but I needed it. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I needed it. And this at various times, just for they never lasted, but I saw several like therapists, or I don't know what they were, therapists, counselors, whatever they were back in the days.
Yeah.
And I remember like I really was just so detached from the people. They were, I mean, they were nothing like you. They were usually like a, you know, an older guy with glasses and a clipboard that sat over there and then told you when the
Yeah.
55 minutes was up. Or it was like a real motivational type of speaker type, not speaker, but, you know, like where I'm like, you know, I don't really care. But I think like because it makes me reflect, you know, on lack of affection as a child, which obviously many kids that are going to be involved with social workers may be in those situations, neglect, or just even like a lack of affection. Parents could even be busy,
Yeah.
for that matter. But I think about myself, and I think about if you were my therapist, and I came in and you gave me a hug, just whatever the context was, or we hugged each other. I think it would be very helpful and it would be meaningful to me. But then I also think about, and the only comparison I have is when I became like a teenager, young adult, and I started entering in relationships. And, you know, I would be really desiring of like physical affection at the beginning, but then it's uncomfortable for me because I'm not used to that thing. So there's two sides to it. So I could either like be completely repellent, or I could be like, you know, I'm not used to it. And so like I need it. And I could especially see it if it was an older, you know, especially, you know, like if they're attractive at all. And again, I'm not even talking about like sexual stuff. I'm just talking about as a kid.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and like wanting that. And then again, either going into like some kind of detachment problem because they're, you know, I'm worried that you're just going to leave as well. Or, you know, I'm infatuated with it, and then, you know, I have like a kid crush on you, or I'm just constantly, because you're giving this to me, right? And my parents aren't giving it to me. And so I'm, you know, using my imagination and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
What do you think about like those contexts?
Yeah. I mean, that's a super, super normal context, and one that I've run into quite a bit. And I think that's where you really, that gut instinct part is really important, and recognizing not everyone needs a hug and not everyone is ready for a hug either. And so like I've shifted that over the years, to, you know, like I could think of a couple clients that were young Alaska Native men who were from communities near mine, who very much saw me in more of an anti-lens, and we connected in that way. And yeah, like teenagery, like maybe more of like, kind of a hug, Miss Josie. And when it gets to that point, being a little bit more like, no, but we can make a handshake though about it. And so having different ways of being able to kind of physically connect, without it necessarily being an embrace of some kind. So I think it's really just kind of trusting your instinct in those moments to recognize like what does feel appropriate, because it's not always going to feel appropriate. And then making adjustments. There's still ways to offer physical connection to people that, so I'm not sitting in the corner with a clipboard. That isn't necessarily a physical embrace. I found it also kind of humbles me because I suck at remembering like handshakes and being cool and knowing how to like, what do you call it? Like dab up or something. I don't know. So there's the ability to like build some humor, and also like allow them to see me in a moment of like, oh, she's not very cool. Like she's barely getting through this handshake, but she's trying. And in the process, I'm also offering a physical connection. That like I'm not behind a glass wall, untouchable and so professional. I'm able to like be in your space and connect with you.
Yeah, and you know, you know, like when we talk about boundaries and then giving hugs, it's not like you can't still have boundaries if you're allowing some physical touch or physical affection in such a way. And I think another element of it, and what I would have appreciated when I learned working with kids myself as an adult, was that if you're really just honest and respectfully honest about it, and if things are getting where you feel uncomfortable, inappropriate, if you just tell them straight up, usually it's respected. I mean, actually, 100% of the time with me, I could see, you know, I've seen other people continue to be disrespected, but I've never had it. If I'm honest and whatever, they seem to respect that even more.
Yeah.
And then the other element before we move off of this subject that I was thinking about was just the social worker side and what the social worker needs. You know, like I'm imagining, you know, a social worker, like a clinical social worker, and they see, you know, 20, 30 plus clients every week. And, you know, let's say it's in an environment where they're not comfortable giving hugs, or it's not allowed or whatever. But what about that social worker that has to listen to everybody's trauma, to everybody's problems, to hard, difficult things to listen to, and maybe they want to give a hug, but maybe they need a hug as well, if that makes sense. How do we take care of our other social workers and ourselves in these contexts? Because more and more as it becomes over professionalized, for example, you see these jobs that'll say like make $100,000 as a clinical social worker, but usually that consists of like seeing an unfathomable amount of clients
Yeah.
on the computer or something, and so oftentimes we're not taking care of ourselves or each other.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, man, don't, yeah, I probably shouldn't get started on the clinical social work, just the caseloads and, my big soapbox lately has been this idea of like weaponized self-care. I've just worked in like so many places where you get these insanely massive caseloads, and work in spaces where the trauma that you're exposed to and hear about is just off the charts, man. Like it's hard stuff. You lose clients. There's a lot of grief, and instead of actually saying like acknowledging that and like being able to be really raw and real with each other as social workers, you get to a point. I got to a point where I was like, if I tell my clinical supervisor or whoever, because I did, like I am not good, man. Like I've had several clients die this year and I don't feel good about it. And I'm struggling because I'm watching the system fail over and over and over again. And all I want to do is change it. There was this interesting reaction of, well, clearly you must not be doing self-care, Josie. I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, I am doing the things, but it became like the administration almost, my perception was the administration was fearful of me because I didn't sound put together. I didn't sound dispassionate and disconnected. I sounded upset. And because I sounded upset, I must therefore be unwell. And I must therefore not be able to do my job well. And so I got to the point where I felt like self-care was being used as this like weapon, that like if I admitted that I need care and I'm asking for community care, I was being kind of reprimanded with, oh, you're not doing your self-care. You need to take the afternoon off and go do self-care. Like what I'm asking you for is community care though. What I'm asking for is acknowledgement of I'm not the only one experiencing this. We all are. And you as my clinical supervisor, my administrator, whoever, you're in this with me. We're in the same arena. And we have to be able to put down those shields for a minute and be like, hey, I see you. And this sucks. And no amount of bubble baths are going to make this feel better tonight. Like, this is not just the issue at hand. It's a systematic issue. It's within our entire societies. And if we can't sit together with the weight of that and at least hold space for each other, we are not caring for each other well.
Yeah. And
can you tell that's been my soapbox for a minute? I'm like on a whole thing about it.
yeah, well, I think that's a common, I think many people are thinking these things, especially in Alaska. Alaska has unique issues, obviously, but, oftentimes the strategy for some of the agencies, larger agencies in Alaska, are to like offer a $10,000 bonus and have somebody move to Alaska, and then they don't have very much vacation time or anything, and so they're, even if you're in like Southeast Alaska where the weather's warmer, it's still raining all the time. People aren't used. I'm not complaining about it. I'm stating that the reality is many people are not going to be prepared to live in that kind of environment, and then they're overworked and working with populations they're not prepared to work with, and then they're burnt out and they don't have any vacation, and just do the math. That's bad. That's going to end up in a bad result.
Well, and then the top level piece that I feel like has been the hardest for me, and I think I might have just seen someone speak to this in the chat, but where I have felt the most grief and frustration and burnout has been, and I would actually call it more of a moral injury, has been around like the systemic racism that exists within the institutions that we work in Alaska, that I have watched over and over and over again, that our Alaska Native youth fail out of these systems much higher rates than others, that they are not able to be placed in foster homes, that they end up experiencing homelessness more, and that they are murdered or go missing at disproportionate rates. And so I need to be able to have conversation about that. And I need to be able to affect change about that. Like if you're going to ask me as a social worker to sit in clinical spaces, hear story all day, carry those stories and not have a way within my agency, within my identity as a social worker to advocate for my clients, that's going to end up with, that's moral injury. That's me being powerless to affect change, to create more safety for the people I'm serving. Like if I'm watching, the data is showing me that Alaska Native males, for example, are failing out of shelter systems at a far higher rate than any other. I have to do something with that knowledge because that's who I am and that's why I care about this work. And we end up working in systems and places that want you to be in this lane, right? Which your lane is to see these clients, do your documentation, and meet your billable hours. That's great. I can get that done, but what do I do with the heartache? What do I do with everything I have now seen?
We didn't hire you to be an activist, Josie.
Right. Yeah. And I'm like, well, you shouldn't have hired me, man, because that's me. Like, and I found it's really interesting that even in job interviews, I'm really upfront about that. Like these are my passions. These are the things I want to work on. These are things I consider my work. And I would like to be able to do that within your agency. And I've had this interesting experience of people being like, oh my God, like she's so passionate. She's so like, gosh, look at all the things that she's doing. That we can't wait to have her on. Let's put her on the website. Let's make sure people know she works for us. And then I get there and it's exactly, but your job is these billable hours. Or I say, hey, we have to make a change because the system is actually really inequitable and causing harm. And then I get told that's not your job. That's above my pay grade. And I'm like, man, I feel like I've been really transparent about who I am. And it has felt like on the outside, that's all good and well. But when we get into it, don't make changes, don't ruffle feathers, and stay in your lane. And that's been, dude, it's been a challenge. Like this social work field, finding where my space is, I wasn't prepared for that, honestly.
Yeah, well, the other side of that too is that it's a disconnection from social work values and ethics. It's literally in our literature that's what it's supposed to be. And so it's interesting. I feel like that's where we're failed by some of the social work organizations is that there's all sorts of limitations and, requirements for this and that and this and that. Mm-hmm. But then, I'm sure we could find plenty of evidence that it's unhealthy to have a super heavy caseload and not have any time to take care of yourself and not have, do you know what I'm saying? And so.
Yeah. Or any like macro space, right? Like we get the same education as social workers. And like you said, we have this code of ethics and values and education that we received that, I remember being in class with like Laverne or Richenda or Christina and like going off about something like I do and being fully wholeheartedly supported in that. And my classmates like joining in and then we're all having this really like powerful conversation. And in those moments being like, I'm exactly in the right place. I love social work. This is why I came here. And then you get out into the field and it's like, oh, you guys don't all have the same values and principles that I do. We're not all operating off the same like core understanding here. And it creates a lot of conflict.
Yeah, I think in this context, social work can be similar to like the experiences of police, right? Like I think oftentimes folks get into social work or police because they want to do the right thing, right? They have for whatever reason they want to do the right thing, but then they get there and they have peers that have been there for a long time and they've become hardened from all these things that we've talked about. They've picked up bad habits themselves, and it's a continuous cycle, right? Because as a new social worker or a police officer, you're going to pick up, without a doubt, to some degree, the habits and the values of those that precede you and that you learn from. And I'm not saying it's always the case. I'm just saying it can
Yeah.
often be the case, is that we can fall into these things, and then next thing you know, you're a burnt out social worker that's middle aged, and live, even though you intended to live a healthy lifestyle and to love it and everything like that, you really
Yeah.
are struggling at that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I've had, I'm really fortunate in that I have a solid family support system that, like, I mean, right now I'm like living in a duplex next to my dad for free because I can't hardly pay rent because I keep quitting jobs because they're not the right fit for me. But dude, not everyone has that option, right? And I've worked in a lot of places where, like, my clinical supervisor or my colleagues are like the most badass, incredible social workers I've ever met, and agree and support and actually give me ideas about like things to change. Um, and I see it more as that in order for them to support their families, to pay their bills, to also have their career be their income, um, they have to make sacrifices. They have to stay in the lane that they are asked to be in so that they can also survive as a father or a wife or a mother or whatever other responsibilities they have. And so I see this kind of, and I've talked with and heard this from others, that there's this sacrifice that gets made somewhere along the way of, do I advocate for every single little thing, or do I do the best that I can within the lane that I'm given so that I can also have balance and support in other areas of my life? And financial security is a big deal, right? Like, we all just can't quit our jobs every time we don't agree with leadership, right? Like, I'm probably going to have to stop doing that eventually.
Well, I think both sides. I see both sides on that.
Yeah.
And I had the privilege of taking a class with Angela Davis several years ago when I was in Hawaii. And in substance abuse recovery, people often recite actually, and a lot of times at the end of a meeting, everyone will hold hands and recite the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's a great saying, and it brings us humility, and it lets us know that we can't change everything. But Angela
Mm-hmm.
Davis told me a different way to look at it. And it was at the perfect time in my life because I was just, I was in graduate school and just kind of gaining some power of my own some agency I didn't know I had. And she says, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm
Mm-hmm.
changing the things I cannot accept. And the only reason I say that is, you're talking about, I think that when you say you're quitting the jobs, a lot of people look at it, like, as a negative thing. But I'm looking at it as
Yeah.
like, hey, Josie has some power and some agency, and she can do these things. I know you have the privilege of, living
Yeah.
rent free, and not everybody has. But I want to
Yeah.
tell you, social workers, you got more power than you think within
Yeah.
whatever. And they need people. I mean, the agencies need you, whether they treat you like that or not. And you have some power, and so you can't just make that transition in the way, changing the way that you think over, snapping your finger. But just know that
Yeah.
you have some power, no matter who you are, and you can enact change both in yourself and the agency that you work in and the community.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't just happen instantaneously, but I
Yeah.
promise you, from my
Yeah.
own experience and things that I've seen, and talking to folks like Josie, I know for a fact that you have power and that you can make changes.
Yeah. And I think the like patience with it is a really big deal. Oh, also practical advice. If you're going to be like me and decide to quit jobs fairly soon into them, don't spend the hiring bonus right away. That has been a very inconvenient part of my life. Also, my personal opinion, not a professional opinion, but personal opinion, hiring bonuses have become like a warning to me now. It was like, oh my God, $10,000 to come work for you? Like, wow, cool. Yeah, that's an incentive. Now I'm like, why do you want to give me that much money? What's going on within your agency? And maybe that's not the case everywhere, but I have had to learn the hard way a couple times with hiring bonuses, which gets really tough because like the last two agencies I left have been, for me, like there were really significant ethical concerns, and I felt like I cannot practice under my social work ethics and values within this organization. And I've brought it to your attention several times, and there's no solution. And so my only option right now is to leave, but now I'm being asked to pay back a bonus. But I feel like, yeah, that's a whole other thing. every now and then I want to go get a law degree so I can like argue paying back bonuses better. Um, but yeah, the other point to that is um, also just trust that you're not alone in that. Um, it can feel really isolating at first when you're trying to find your space, but you will find your space, and you'll find your community of people that are like-minded, that have the same visions, values that you do. Like I got to a point of feeling really not hopeless, but a little bit defeated. And I was working for all of these really big agencies because I thought like that's pinnacle, right? Like you want to work for the biggest, most effective agency to serve the most people. And what I've found is along the way, I have met people who see my passion and my fire as value, and who I'm able to see that reflected in them too. And I'm able to like get fired up by the things they're fired up about. And we have this like mutual like badassery that happens. And because of that, really cool things happen. Like, I don't know, I mean, if you can get into like working with the folks at Native Movement or Data for Indigenous Justice, like they're completely like dismantling the way that like that scarcity mindset, it just doesn't exist there. Like I work with OCPIC, Dr. Charlene, who's a UAF grad too, and she's got this way of supporting her organization, her people within it, that it doesn't even exist in the rest of society, and at least in colonized society, that like scarcity of time and money is not a thing. Scarcity of resources is not a thing. She gives into her community and her people with the knowledge that like what she needs will come, and what she's able to give, she can. And that just changes the way that we work with each other, right? If there's not this like scarcity of resources, or this is my project, or this is my work, it builds this like powerful community of people. And I think that's going to become more common. And there is a lot of people who are recognizing this isn't the way that we should be in community with each other. And this isn't the way that we should support each other either. And I'm constantly having to unlearn, man. Like everything I learned my first couple years in the field, I am having to unlearn it, because I got into that. Like, oh, I'm so busy all the time, and look at how many people are on my schedule, and look at how many clients I see. I'm so busy and important. And I had to like, I'm still trying to figure out how to get out of that mindset and get more into the space of who am I authentically? Like, I'm not a busy, crazy, runaround person. Like, I'm someone who's thoughtful and passionate. And, I got to a place too where I was being told so much that, like, I'm too much. And I got to this really uncomfortable place about a year ago where I was like, dude, I was going to quit social work. I was like, all I do apparently is piss people off. And I'm not trying to, but I just keep being told that I'm too much and I'm too loud. And my favorite one has been that I'm intimidating. Um, and then I started spending time around people who also got told that. And I saw them as like the most generous, the most heart-filled, the kindest, most powerful group of people I have ever had the privilege to work around. And they all got told that same thing in other spaces. And so I was able to see me reflected in them. And when I look at them, I see like, wow, these are like the most badass women I have ever laid eyes on. And I get to be counted among like their colleague. Like, there are places, there are people. My message in all of that is just, if it's not your place, if you have the ability, move on until you find it. Because having to sacrifice pieces of yourself and why you care about this work in order to do it, it really doesn't feel good.
Yeah, and especially in order, oftentimes, and I don't know what your contexts were, but, it's like for-profit organizations,
Yeah.
so, which just, when you really break it down, it just doesn't really align with what social work
Yeah.
should be about. And I'd like to see, those people that are in it for the profit be replaced
Yeah.
with people like you,
Yeah.
and the other folks that you were sharing about, that are taking the power, taking the control of it.
Yeah.
And I think that as social workers, it's obviously, very big ideas here. But I'm a big believer in also we'll never change anything if we don't imagine it to be different. But is for social workers to hold ourselves accountable. I should maybe a better way to put that is to challenge ourselves to take control of these situations and not just be cogs in the system.
Yeah.
Which it can be. I'm not saying it's your fault that you ended up that we sometimes end up as cogs in the system. Sometimes it's just really hard. You might be paying off a student loan. You might have got that bonus and have to make up the several years. You know what I'm saying? I get it
Yeah.
that it's hard, but we can take the power back and we can control social work moving forward. It's not going to be easy. There's so much money involved in it these days between
Yeah.
insurance companies, the for-profit organizations, and all that.
Yeah.
But we can do it, and I think just this conversation with you and the way that you're talking about things is just really inspiring.
Yeah.
And so I hope you don't let those people that are telling you you're too much. I hope you don't believe. I hope you don't believe them, because I don't see that at all.
Yeah. No, thank
So,
you. I've actually, um, I don't, and that's because I have a community of people right now who, over the years, have helped me understand what my identity is, and that's another big takeaway for me, man. Like, you can't do this work alone. I guess you could. I can't do it alone. I tried for a while to just, pave my own way, and the strength and courage that I get at seeing my value reflected from others and having people communicate my value, my strengths, and my weaknesses to me, um, there's a lot of safety in that. And I think because of, especially if you're in macro spaces, um, this work can feel really scary. Like, I don't know what's coming next. I don't know if I'm going to be able to affect this change. But when you got a group of people around you who just believe in you, and whether you fail or succeed, will still believe in you, then the work almost becomes kind of second to the value of that community. Like, my identity as a social worker is very much connected with the relationships I have with my social work community. And many of them are not social workers. Many of them are just leaders, matriarchs, healers, people that do the same work that I do.
and you make me also think, another thing we can do better as social workers, and it's very hard in this. You think, we're so connected via technology that we should
Yeah.
be well connected, but there's so much. We're so oversaturated with invites to this and emails and everything like
Yeah.
that. And it can be hard to stay connected. And so I think,
Yeah.
folks that want to work together, have, need mentors, want people that are like-minded, to talk to and bounce ideas off. We've got to do a better job. And part of that is, like, we feel like many social workers feel like they don't have the time.
Yeah.
But we need to do better at that, for sure.
Well, and one of the things, like, especially in my earlier years while I was still in undergrad and graduate school, one thing that was so valuable to me is when people made time for me when I assumed that person didn't have time. Like, I think about, like, Dr. Dementive. I can reach out to her any time of the day, and I know she's got a million things going on, and she always makes time. And she's always willing to set up time to have a call, to have a conversation. And that meant a lot to me. And now I'm in a place where I recognize when someone asks that of me, it is really important and really valuable for me to prioritize that ask, because community is so needed. And that's, again, unlearning that busy mindset for myself. Like, yeah, I have things to do, but also the way that I connect with people in my community and value their time is really important.
Yeah. What's up, David? Before I turn
Hey,
it
can
over
you guys hear
to
me?
David. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just one second here, David. I just wanted to comment also on Dr. Dementive had a very similar influence on me.
Yeah.
I believe that, especially I've gotten to know her more as, a colleague, but she was my professor for a long time, and view her as a mentor and somebody I highly respect. But she seems to operate via a value system that she is that I don't know what you'd say, that the value system requires her to
Yeah.
respond with empathy,
Yeah.
with thoughtfulness,
Yeah.
respond from the heart, essentially,
Yeah.
and not just
Yeah.
brush you by, no matter how busy she is. And
Yeah.
that's an important value to have, not just as a social worker, but as a human
Yeah.
being, as a professional that other people look up to and look to. And so I really, really respect that about her.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I appreciate that you brought that up. What's up, David?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Listen, I just wanted to, sometimes on watching your show, uh, Professor Christian. Honestly, there's times where I have a lot of questions, um, but this particular time, I really don't. And I'm only calling in because um, so I'm a new social worker in Alaska. And what made me want to be a social worker was Alaska. I transplanted here from um, the lower 48, um, Atlanta, Georgia, Detroit, Michigan, all those places where I live,
Yeah.
simply because basically had an accident and my back was broken and I had to try to find a way to work. So my wife and I moved to uh, rural Alaska, or the it was a little bitty town way in the Arctic. And
Okay.
after getting there, I know I just found a whole new passion. I just found a whole new
Mm.
passion of wanting to do something with something that I always been doing in my life, was basically helping people, but I didn't know exactly how. And
Hmm.
just started becoming familiar with um, the Native Alaskans, and they welcomed me. They didn't look at
Yeah.
me the way I was looked at in the lower 48. Actually, they looked at me in a whole different way. And it was just a
Mm.
powerful place that I've never experienced before. And like I said, generally I have like a ton of questions, but when we were told who was coming on the show, I did a little research, like I always do, on a person. And so when I tell you that out of a lot of guests I've seen coming on this particular show, um, your the your social work level um, is here. And I'm not just trying to call to, pat you on the back or anything like that. But if there was a level of social work that I want to be at, it's here, because your work speaks volumes. To hear someone say that you're doing too much, or hear someone say that, you know, this is way too much. You're doing too much. Whatever. Like, you know, then you realize that this is really real work. After meeting Professor Christian and hearing the stories that he's had over the social work platform that he's had, what I realize is that this is not easy work. But when you're doing it, there has to be something that motivates you. There has to be something that like
Hmm.
pushes you to get up the next day, or there has to be something that uh, that not so much that you're striving for, but something that just lifts you up, push you in that place. So
Yeah.
I've dedicated the rest of my life now. As you can see, I got a little gray. So I've started this work just a few years, but in the few years that I've been in it, like you know, there's not a day that I can tell you that I want to quit.
Yeah.
I can tell you I get tired. I can tell you that
Yeah.
even in my job I get tired. But there's not a day I want to quit. There's a day that I want to do better. There's
Yeah.
a day I feel like I should have done better. There's a day that I feel like, there could have been more I could have done. But then there's not a day I want to quit. I've been in jobs, and I want to quit the damn job, but but not
Hmm.
want to quit what I'm doing. So
Yeah.
so Ms. Josie, I just want to say that even looking over your body of work, I'm impressed. I'm inspired. I read the whole FBI honors scenario, um, and honestly, I don't know. I want that type of level.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not even close to there yet, but I want that.
Yeah.
I want that where you're in
Yeah.
the trenches and it's like, I'm almost done, I promise. But it's as if there's this thing where you can look at youth and you can try to say, well, because of being young or whatever like that. But no, even being young doesn't make it happen like that. It's all about something that drives you to do it. And if there's a question I had to ask, I would ask this: what's your motivation? What's motivating you to continue and to get out in the trenches? What's motivating you to do that? And I'm gonna close it because I want to say this: don't let it stop because you're helping somebody over here too. So I really truly appreciate this.
Yeah,
So that's all.
making me tear up a little bit. um, thank you. That means a lot. That's really cool to hear. Yeah, I think. Um, hang on, let me get my emotions together. Um, Something about validation in this work always kind of hits a soft spot in my heart and I think it's because pretty much every day I feel like I don't know what I'm doing or if I'm on the right track. And having external validation, especially in macro levels, social work for me has been everything. It's been like a compass for me, especially days where the work feels like it's too much and it's too hard. Um, Having the people that know me really well, or the people who are just out in the community doing their own work, take the time to validate and to recognize, and that just means the world. Um, I think what motivates me is I don't know if you guys are familiar with Abigail Echo Hawk. I actually just got to meet her recently, and I got my education and worked in spaces where, um, in order to assimilate and in order to stay in my lane, I had to be a more watered down version of myself, and I had to not be on fire, and I had to not be angry. And I say this with as much like heart and love as I can, but what motivates me most days is that I'm angry. Um, and and there was a time in my life where I would have thought that meant something was wrong with me or I wasn't doing self-care. Um, but I don't think that's it anymore because I've had a lot of people like Abigail Echo Hawk, like Dr. Percy Lazard, like Ockpick that have said that like it's okay to be angry. I am angry at things that are upsetting, that should not happen. It's okay to see injustice and feel anger. There's a quote I really love. Um, if your soul is on fire to serve in a way that scares you to death and you don't feel worthy, ready, or able, and that burning feeling will not leave you alone, congratulations, you have your calling. And that's Jaya John from Medicine Words for Your Brave Revolution. Um, Hearing words like that, hearing people in my community, my network of people validate that this anger and this fire is not a bad thing. It's actually a really beautiful part of who I am, and it's a gift, has transformed for me this transformed it into something that fuels me rather than makes me feel inadequate or makes me feel like not a good social worker. Um, and I try to offer that to others as well. Like when you feel that anger, that passion, whatever it is, and it's a really intense emotion, like listen to that. I think we get taught sometimes that we're not supposed to, or we're supposed to dull it down, or stay in our lanes. But I'm learning to not do that. And I just, I gave a keynote address a couple weeks ago where I made the entire thing basically about how angry I am and how excited I was that the room that was sitting in front of me was also angry. Because I knew that that anger meant love. And I knew that that love meant that we were here for a reason to do work together. Um, so yeah, I think what fuels me is my anger, but beneath that is my love, and my love for this community, and my love um, for for creating a different, I don't know, creating a difference, I guess. Got me all emotional, and now I'm rambling.
No, I think that you're just reflecting, and I think that sometimes that comes when we're doing it ourselves, it feels like rambling, but it doesn't come
Yeah.
across that way on the other side.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to make one comment. There's also there's a book that's a quote from one of the scholars I respect, Paulo Freire, and it's called "We Make the Road by Walking." And the only thing I want to say is that sometimes, because you said, you feel that calling, you feel that spirit, you feel like this motivation to do something, and that could be with your own life. It could be on behalf of an issue or on behalf of someone else, whatever it is, some kind of change making. It may be all of those things. Actually, it very likely might be all of those things. I would say that sometimes you don't know where to go. You don't know what to do and who to listen to or what path to take. And my advice would be to make the road by walking it, and you'll create that path, and it will take you wherever it is that you need it to go. And I know that's kind of like pseudo-scientific stuff, but again, when I go back to the things that I've learned, the lessons that I've learned in my life is that the universe works in your favor when you're walking in the direction you want to go, if that makes sense. And that's a loaded that's a loaded concept there. But I'm serious about that. If you listen to your heart and you follow whatever your passion is, whatever your ideas are, whatever you're feeling called to, you may not have imagined the destination exactly as it will become, but I guarantee that you'll like it, and that you'll move forward and you'll increase in your life. And I've just got so many examples in my own life and in other people's lives, and I think that many people that I respect say the same thing. And so it's a universal truth, and it can be hard to accept or to grasp, I guess. Not grasp, but how to take hold of it and do it. But just take the first few steps, and you'll get where you need to go.
Yeah, and taking those in community with people. Like David, anytime you want to reach out, bounce around ideas for your work, your passions, I always make space and time for that. I don't do any of these steps on my path without people holding my hands, supporting me, maybe pulling me in a different direction if I need to. There's a lot of trust in my community, and especially in the women I work alongside with. There's a lot of trust there, not only in helping guide me in my direction, but also trust that they'll let me know if I need to change it too. That's been really important to me.
Yeah. Well, I've said this many times on podcasts, but the one measurement to know whether it's a good podcast is to know how time goes, and it goes by really quickly when you're having a great conversation, great dialogue. So first of all, I just want to say thanks for. We just jumped right into things, and it went exactly what we said it was going to do. It naturally went where it will. But we are coming to the end of the time, and David brought up something we haven't even talked about. And I'm only vaguely familiar. I didn't look as deep as David did. But I know you won the award from the FBI, and I think it's was it for working with missing Indigenous women? I can't remember exactly. It was a while ago when I looked at it.
Yeah, so I received the FBI's Community Directors Award, which every field office in the United States has an opportunity to honor a community member or organization for their collaboration with the FBI. That award in particular was when I was doing clinical social work over at the Covenant House here in Anchorage, and I specifically worked with youth who experienced trafficking and exploitation. And so because of the nature of that work, I spent quite a bit of time collaborating with the FBI. And we, in particular, the FBI victim specialist, who in her own right, Erin Terry, who is a badass and I love her. She is a social worker, doesn't carry the license or the degree, but she is in every way. So her and I spent a lot of time together, helping young people navigate really tough situations, sometimes safety planning, sometimes walking through the legal system with them. So that was what that award was for. In addition to the clinical stuff, Erin being one of those women in my life who just grabs your hand and takes her along with you, started inviting me to co-train with her. So anytime the FBI would be asked to come and train on issues of human trafficking, she'd invite me to come along. And I did. And that was another one of those moments of like, oh my God, I don't want to stand up and train in front of people. But it's so important to pay attention to your heart in those moments and override that fear with what's important. And so I've gotten to train with her in, all over Anchorage and Sitka, down in the Kenai Peninsula, Seward, and it's just been incredible to get to not only train on the issue of human trafficking in Alaska, but to train as an Indigenous woman, as a survivor, as somebody who, this is my heart work, this is what I aim to change in our community. So yeah, that was super cool, but it also kind of, I think, uplifted my work in a way that I'm really thankful to Aaron for nominating me for that, because I got a lot of, my name got out there a little bit more, and I have since been able to found my own organization, Signify Consulting, where I'm able to do a lot of training around the community. I was just down in Juneau, Fort Lincoln, Haida, where we did this really beautiful community event centered on human trafficking and missing murdered Indigenous relatives. Just hosted the second annual data summit here in Anchorage, which was incredible. Dude, I was like in tears at the end of it. Like this group of women, Prevention Now, Ride My Road, Data for Indigenous Justice. We put together this event where I've never seen anything like it. We were talking about two of the heaviest issues you could possibly talk about, human trafficking and missing murdered Indigenous relatives. And there was so much joy and laughter and healing that happened in that space. And it felt like a shift for me. Like we were moving in a different direction. And we were doing it with community and with joy and with real authentic connection and love for each other. It was incredible. And in addition to that, I actually don't know how still, because the government is super secretive, but I was appointed by the president to the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking. So I've gotten to spend a lot of time in different parts of the country, in Washington, D.C., specifically talking about the issues here in Alaska. And actually a couple of weeks ago, my friend and colleague, Christina Love, who is an Indigenous woman from Juneau, was nominated to the council. So for the first time in history, there are two Alaska Native Indigenous women representing at the federal level on a presidentially appointed council to impact some changes for Alaska. So it feels like a really big moment in time, and I'm not sure what Christina and I are going to do, but I can tell you that she's got a mass amount of fire. She is a badass advocate, and she's smarter than hell, and change is going to happen, and I'm excited to see what that next year will bring. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at professionally right now, is just developing Signify, which if you can take a class on learning how to run a business at some point in your social work education, that's probably a good idea, because I'm failing at that. And then I still have the desire to get my LCSW, so I work part-time doing telehealth in the evenings, slowly working towards my hours.
Yeah, well, congratulations on the award. You said, sorry, I was reading the chat at that last comment. You said you're working towards your clinical licensure? What did you just say?
Yeah. I think I'm only like 300 hours away. It's just taking me a really long time. That happens when you move organizations a bunch.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how can I have two follow-up questions real quick.
Yeah.
How can people get involved if they're, which they should be in, it'll go into my follow-up question, my second follow-up question, but how can they be involved if they want to know more information, or if they want to, provide support or contribute where they can?
Yeah, definitely follow me on LinkedIn. Just look up Josie Heyano. I usually post quite a bit of stuff there. I also have a website, signifyconsulting.org, where there's a way to connect with me. And then my email is josie@signifyconsultingak.org. But I'll also throw out there, if you're just looking to get involved, especially in the MMR work, check out Native Movement, check out Data for Indigenous Justice. The statewide missing and murdered working group has volunteer opportunities. And honestly, if you have the capacity, volunteering with some of these organizations just to build community Would be a really, really good idea.
Yeah. Well, the second part to that question is, I think many people can feel very, very separated from issues like that, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. They don't feel directly involved. They may not know somebody directly. But as social workers, what responsibility, like say we're living in Alaska, I mean anywhere, but Alaska is just a good context for it. What responsibility do we have to pay attention to things like this and be aware and, to do even if it's just, awareness is making a difference even to a degree in talking about it. But what responsibilities do we have as social workers to pay attention and to act upon, such, devastating issues in some regard? That you mentioned a lot of hope, but if you were to have lost a family member or something in that regard, that's devastating, right?
Yeah. Well, that's why I do the work that I do. I feel like I have, it is my responsibility because not only am I. Oh. Hi.
Hello. I don't want to interrupt you talking.
Echo.
Oh.
Can you mute yourself for just a minute, Jazz? There we go.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's definitely, I think we have a lot of responsibility. I think when we take on the role of a social worker, like we do have a responsibility to our community, especially when we see injustice happening. But I think it's important to be able to pay attention to your own capacity. And that's why I think networking and community is really important. I can't tackle every issue on missing murdered Indigenous relatives, but I know some people who can. And I can't tackle every issue on data sovereignty, but I know some people who can. And I think the more that we're able to build that relationship with community, the more our advocacy work just becomes connecting people. It's not necessarily that we have to take on all the issues ourselves.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And sorry, last pitch for that. My other soapbox, it's not a soapbox. I should get a better name for it. It's my, I don't know, we'll think about it. My other advice would be wherever you work within social work, whether that's clinical, macro, no matter what agency you're at, pay attention to your data systems. We're all using them, we're all working with them, but having a social work lens when using them to recognize, is the data equitable? Is the data telling a story that makes sense for the community that you're serving? And is the data causing harm? We get so used to data systems just being these tools we have to use. But I think we're able to recognize as social workers when something needs to be changed, even if it's small. And if you can just advocate within your data systems to make sure that the people you serve are represented well, are there languages they're spoken on the drop-down menu? Is there cultural identity on the drop-down menu? Just making sure that the data reflects the humans that you serve, I think is a really great place for all of us to be working in.
Yeah, appreciate that. Jazz, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Hi. This is exciting to be able to actually talk to you directly. Right off the bat, I just want to say thank you. I've just got done crying over in the corner, so that's kind of why I wanted to wait a little bit before getting on the show. It's just been extremely intense and powerful to hear a lot of what you're saying and to be nodding my head and really just feeling and thinking the same things. I am kind of just getting started with going back to school, having done a lot of thinking about what it is that I want to do and where I want to be with my life. So I'm kind of focusing in on studying the things that are going to help me do the things that I want to do. And then, that's essentially advocating. It's sounding a lot like I'm going to be doing social work, essentially. I guess if I were to ask a question, it would just be if you have any advice for somebody who is kind of, you mentioned constantly leaving jobs and kind of being in situations where, you're needing a lot of help from the community in order to, I guess, be successful or get yourself into a position where you can be there. And that can be really hard for a lot of people that are still a part of those communities, that are marginalized and oppressed. And I guess just, do you have any advice for ways to move out of that? Would be my question.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really good question. Well, first, I think paying attention to your tears and paying attention to the grief that resonates in those tears. Because I think, and I don't want to speak for you, but I know that my moments of crying my eyes out in this field have been because there's grief. There's this feeling of I'm losing a connection to a work that I want to do. I'm losing my identity as the advocate that I want to be. I'm losing touch with who I think I am in this field. And in the process, I'm not able to fight for my community, which is all I want to do. And so I think, number one, just acknowledging that grief and acknowledging, for me, it's been really powerful to also step out of my own identity and recognize I am still trying to affect change and operate with systems where I am not supposed to succeed. Like, these systems are not set up for people of color, for women, for marginalized identities, for LGBTQ plus communities. They are not set up where you're supposed to succeed. So just recognizing and validating that this grief is a very normal reaction to trying to be successful and operate in systems that have not been created for you to do so. And then finding your community, finding the people who are also up against the same systems and creating relationship with those people in whatever way possible. Because again, back to what I said earlier, the hardest part of this for me was when I tried to fight the system by myself. And that was isolating. And that felt like I wasn't good enough, and there was something defective or wrong with me. And it wasn't until I found a group of people that I admire more than anyone I've ever met, and they saw in me qualities about themselves, that I was able to do this work and feel like I'm not alone. My grief makes sense, and my grief is valued. I think that's how I was able to kind of shift into a space of more acceptance of where I'm at. And I mean, I'm still not in the place that I want to be. I'm trying to work from home. My computer died this morning. I don't know what to do about that. There's still a lot of bumps in the road. But I swear I couldn't do any of this without the people in my life, the community, the people who see me and recognize and validate that this is super hard. And through who all of those times I left jobs, who cheered me on when I did. Like, that was everything to me. I couldn't have just kept walking away if there weren't people saying, Josie, you deserve better. Or Josie, you're absolutely right. Like, we'll do whatever we can to support you while you find what's next. So I think for me, the inconsistency of what I thought social work would be versus what it has looked like, I'm leaning into trusting my heart and intuition that I have a passion. There's a purpose that's calling to me for a reason. There's a reason some of these other things aren't working, and it's because it's not for me. And I exist in a society where that's not supposed to happen, right? I'm supposed to get a job, hold my job down, go to retirement, get my benefits, be a really good employee, show up. But that's what I was supposed to do. That's what we are supposed to do. And so it doesn't feel in alignment with that. To be this person that leaves a bunch of jobs. Like, I have so much insecurity about that. Like, as, a woman living on my own, like, what's wrong with me? I can't hold a job down. I must be like, what was all this education for? I must not know how to do this right. And again, back to, no, I'm just a person that hasn't found that space yet, and who is trying things, and it didn't work out, and I can trust that it's because that wasn't for me. That was a long answer, but I hope it gives you something.
Oh, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here on this podcast and for speaking to so many things that I'm sure I will be able to refer back to. I really like what you said about the system is not for us. I've actually written some poems that are exactly talking about that subject. And it is really hard to accept that and be able to still operate even though you can see that firsthand. But thank you so much.
You're welcome. I would also say, like, even if you don't have those community connections right away, like, start following some people on socials, on LinkedIn, that are putting out this type of messaging. For me, that's really reassuring that, like, I can get on my socials and I see this, like, powerhouse of a person who is killing it in social work, and they validate how I'm feeling, and that makes a difference for me.
All right. Thanks, Jazz and David, for your contributions. I really appreciate you calling in and asking the great questions and just contributing to our conversation. I really appreciate it. Well, Josie, it's getting late.
Yeah.
There's one thing I wanted to do before I let you go,
Okay.
and that is so there's a term that's used internationally, but it's not really used in the United States, and it's called revolutionary social work. And so I've really been trying to develop it further and adapt it. And I look at revolutionary social work being different than, like, say, critical social work or decolonizing social work. It contains elements of those, but it focuses also, like, on the self, and focuses on changing the self and looking inward and changing who we are, and then and changing the system, challenging the status quo, challenging ourselves, challenging systems. And I feel like listening to you, you epitomize that, like 110%. And so I just want to say I appreciate you, and I'm glad that there are folks out you that just live in the world, human beings like you, but even more so that you're in social work and you're doing the things that you do and you're talking about things. I just wanted to say that I highly respect you, and I just wanted to crown you as a revolutionary social worker.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, just much respect to you. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate that you taking the time to talk to me and to, put this message out to the students, provide access to them, and then hopefully this disseminates out further to the wider social work world. And so thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I just want to give you the opportunity for any last words.
Yeah, thank you. This has been amazing. I think all of our professors at school warned us about imposter syndrome. And I don't know if it's still imposter for me, but I always just get kind of tickled when people want to talk to me about stuff. Like, who am I? But okay. So it's really uplifting for me to have these types of conversations. I really appreciate, the questions people asked and the validation. And it always seems to be in alignment. Today was a day I woke up feeling like, man, what the heck am I doing in this world? And to hear, to hear everything that you guys said and the appreciation and getting crowned today, I wasn't expecting that. It's just uplifting. It's why I love this work. It's why I say yes to things like this, because our community of people is pretty incredible, and I'm really grateful for it. So thank you. I appreciate this time.
Yeah, thank you. And hopefully we can connect. I'm sure we will at some point in another way, but we'll work together or connect in person at some point and sharing some space together.
That'd be great.
But yeah, I hope you have a great day. Thanks again for your time. Yeah. And I will probably get this produced over the weekend, and I'll email you over the YouTube
Sweet.
and the links.
Right on. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to the Fifth Avenue Mall and try to get my laptop fixed. So send out good vibes to the universe for me.
All right. Well, good luck with that.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. This episode was recorded live on Thursday, March 14th, 2024. This episode featured Josie Heyano, and it was hosted by Christian Ace Stettler. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks Department of Social Work, this has been a Conscious Party production. You've been listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. Your story, my story, our story. All right, everyone. Until next time, keep being revolutionary. Peace.